Here is an example application. Of course, you find it attached. And as you see, this application has, in the end, just two counters. One counter counting upwards, one counter counting backwards. And of course, that's not a fancy application. We're going to see another example later in this module, but this application allows me to explore custom hooks together with you, show you why we might want to build custom hooks and how we build custom hooks. So here's the code for this application, which again you find attached. And in here, we in the end just got three components: the backward counter and the forward counter, the card component, which is just a wrapper component providing some styling, and in app.js, I'm using the forward and the backward counter components, and these components do just what their name implies. The forward counter uses useState and useEffect to manage a state and to create an interval which simply starts counting up and which then sets a new counter state every second, every 1000 milliseconds. And in the backward counter, I'm doing the exact same thing, but here I'm subtracting from the counter. But other than that, it's the same logic. So therefore, it is fair to say that these two components are fairly similar. Now, of course, we might be able to create one component instead and then use props to configure it differently, but it would also be realistic that in real applications, you have different components which, to a certain extent, might do related tasks. And it is fair to say that we therefore definitely have some code duplication in the forward and the backward counter. If we leave that small detail of subtracting or adding to the counter aside, it's exactly the same code in the end. And whenever you have code duplication in programming, you typically want to take that code and refactor it and create a function which holds the shared code. And that's exactly what we're going to do with custom hooks. Because the problem we face here is that the code which we want to reuse uses React hooks like useState and useEffect, and it updates the state by calling the state updating function. And as you learned with the rules of hooks, you are not allowed to use these React hooks in any random function. You must only use them in React component functions or custom hooks. So if we want to outsource that logic into a separate function, we need to build such a custom hook. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So how do we build a custom hook then? Well, typically, just as with components, we store every hook in a standalone file. So I will start by creating a new hooks folder side by side to the components folder. And in there, I will add the use-counter.js file. Now, the file name is totally up to you. You don't have to name it use-counter. I do name it like this though, because there is a clear rule which we have to follow when it comes to the function name inside of that file. Because we are going to create a function here, either as a const which stores a function or with the function keyword. I'll go for the const approach, but both would work. And that function which you do create has to start with use in its name. That is a must do. That is a hard rule which you have to follow. It will be a normal function in the end, but the use at the beginning signals to React that it will be a custom hook, and it gives React the guarantee that you will use that function by respecting these rules of hooks, so that you will use this custom hook function just as you use the built-in hooks. And that is a guarantee React needs, because otherwise, if you start using React hooks in your custom hook, and you would use your custom hook in a forbidden place, you would implicitly also use the built-in hooks in a wrong place. And that's why we start with use here, because React can look out for that. And actually, this project setup will give you a warning if you have a function starting with use and you then start violating some of these rules of hooks. That's why this is a must do. Start with use in the function name. And thereafter you can name it however you want. I will name it use counter and then store a regular function in it. And because of that function name, I also named the file like this. But again, for the file name, there is no specific rule. You could name it however you want. Now, of course, ultimately, the goal is to use this function in another file. So therefore, I will export this function here. And then inside of this function, we can start adding that logic which we want to reuse. And in our case, if we start with the forward counter, in the end, we can just copy that code here. From the forward counter, that code where we use state and use effect, not the code where we return JSX, just the other code. Copy that and add it inside of that use counter function. Now, since we are using use state and use effect now, we need to import these things from React because you always need to import what you use. So here we import use state and use effect like this. Now we got this logic in this custom hook function. But of course, in the end, we still want to utilize it in our forward counter and later also in the backward counter. How can we do that?